The sky over Pine Creek was painted in a shade of gray that felt almost intentional, as if nature itself understood what kind of day it was. At St. Joseph's Chapel, rows of cruisers lined the church's front steps, each one glistening with droplets of rain. Officers stood outside, hats pressed to their chests, nodding quietly at civilians who passed in silent acknowledgement. Inside, the pews were filled with uniformed men and women, stoic and cold, and among them stood the unexpected presence of black leather and tattoos, members of the Iron Reapers Motorcycle Club. Their inclusion felt out of place to outsiders, but not to those who really knew Officer Daniel Briggs. Daniel wasn't just a cop. He had a past before the badge, a past that wore leather and roared down highways. He left it behind for law and order, for structure and redemption. That past, however, hadn't entirely let go of him. It stood now at the back of the chapel in steel-toed boots and sunglasses, paying respect the only way they knew how, through silence and presence. Yet what none of them expected was that it wouldn't be the living who'd stir the first wave of unease. It would be the dog. Ace, Daniel's loyal K-9 partner, had been quiet since the day the shot was fired. He hadn't barked, hadn't eaten much. His handlers said he barely slept. But when they brought him into the church, something changed. As the casket was opened for the last farewell, Ace tugged free from his leash. The room fell still. No one moved. With solemn, deliberate steps, Ace approached the casket. And then he did what no one anticipated. He leapt gently into it and laid across Daniel's chest, his head nestled over the man's heart. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some cried openly. A few turned their faces away, unable to witness the purity of the bond between man and dog. But then came a moment that twisted the air in the chapel like a sudden shift in wind. Ace lifted his head, not in confusion, but in certainty, and stared straight at someone in the crowd. Not at one of the officers. Not at the priest. But at a biker. One in particular. A graying man with a long scar running down his cheek and the name Sledge stitched into his cut. Sledge, who hadn't moved an inch since entering the chapel, suddenly looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, folded his arms. Ace didn't blink. He just stared, ears alert, body stiff. It wasn't mourning anymore. It felt pointed, like recognition, like accusation. And the chapel, which had been filled with the collective weight of grief, now held something else entirely. Tension. Something was wrong, and more than one person could feel it. No one spoke, but glances were exchanged. Someone near the front leaned toward another and whispered, "Why's the dog lookin' at him like that?" The words, though soft, carried like thunder across the silence. The priest faltered in his sermon. Sledge turned his face slightly, but it was too late. The moment had rooted itself in everyone's mind. Whatever had just happened wasn't going to fade away. And somewhere deep in the back of the chapel, someone slipped out unnoticed. If this story kept you hooked until now, just wait for what's next. Hit that like button to support the channel and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming chapters. Ace knows something, and you'll want to be here when the truth comes out. Turn on the bell and stay with us. Outside the chapel, the cold drizzle had returned, mixing with the distant echo of police radios and the low rumble of motorcycle engines cooling off in the parking lot. Sledge leaned against a pillar near the entrance, pulling a cigarette from behind his ear with fingers that trembled ever so slightly. He hadn't touched one in years. Daniel always gave him hell for it. But today felt different. Today felt like a door had cracked open that was never meant to be touched again. He lit the cigarette and exhaled slowly, watching the smoke curl into the misty air. His hands were still shaking. Not from the cold. Not from grief. From something else. From the way that dog looked at him. Not like a confused animal searching for comfort, but like a sentry recognizing a trespasser. Sledge had seen that stare before. On the job. In moments where silence spoke louder than screams. It was a stare that meant, "I remember." Inside, murmurs had begun to ripple through the crowd. Some of the younger officers whispered quietly in the pews, eyes darting toward the back door where Sledge had exited. Captain Rosa Delaney, Daniel's longtime friend and partner, stood near the altar with her arms crossed, her mind churning. She knew something wasn't right. Ace's reaction hadn't been instinct, it had been intent. And intent meant memory. She'd spent a decade by Daniel's side, and yet she had never seen that dog behave like that, not even in the darkest crime scenes. She found herself walking slowly down the aisle, past the mourning families, past the younger recruits, past the reapers who remained still and unreadable. At the casket, Ace still lay motionless, but his ears twitched at her presence. She knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his fur. "What did you see, boy?" she whispered. His body gave a low shudder, and for just a second, his eyes drifted toward the chapel doors, toward where Sledge had been standing. Rosa stood. Her eyes scanned the room again, slower this time. She wasn't just looking for Sledge anymore. She was looking for answers. She had heard things over the years. Not about Daniel directly, but about the people he once rode with. Before he joined the academy. Before he changed his name. She thought those stories had been buried. Daniel never confirmed them, but he never outright denied them either. And now Ace had looked at a man like he was staring at a ghost. Back outside, Sledge took one last drag from his cigarette and crushed the butt under his boot. He wasn't the kind of man who ran. He'd seen enough in his life to know that ghosts don't disappear when you turn your back, they follow you. And Daniel's ghost, it seemed, had chosen today to rise. He looked back at the church doors one last time. His jaw tightened. And then, quietly, he walked away. Later that evening, the police station in Pine Creek sat under dimmed lights and heavy silence. Most of the force had taken the day off in honor of Daniel, but Captain Rosa Delaney remained at her desk, unable to silence the unease creeping through her. A photo of Daniel sat by her monitor, him and Ace in front of a squad car, both with that same proud posture. She stared at it for a long time, trying to reconcile the man she knew with the questions now blooming like dark bruises in her thoughts. She pulled Daniel's personnel file from the cabinet, flipping through records she knew almost by heart. Clean. Loyal. Commended for bravery 4 times. But the earlier years, the ones before he transferred to Pine Creek, were thin, almost too thin. A few vague mentions of relocation, a previous jurisdiction in Pennsylvania, a transfer with minimal detail. Nothing suspicious on the surface, but Rosa had worked enough homicide cases to know, sometimes what's not there says more than what is. Unable to ignore the itch in her gut, she called up a contact in state records. "I need a background trace on Daniel Briggs," she said quietly, "including aliases and known associates prior to 2011. Discreet, okay? No alerts to active family or colleagues." There was a pause on the other end, but then a sigh of agreement. She hung up and leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Something about the way Ace stared at Sledge kept looping in her mind, like a skipped record. Across town, the Iron Reapers were gathering at a roadside bar just off Route 17. The kind of place where the jukebox only played old rock and the walls smelled of leather and old regrets. Sledge walked in, soaked from the rain. His brothers fell quiet. He didn't have to say much, they'd all seen what happened. "He recognized me," Sledge said flatly, grabbing a beer from the counter without waiting for it. "The damn dog looked right through me." A younger biker named Reese frowned. "You think the mutt knows something?" Sledge didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a long drink, wiped his mouth and said, "No, I think the mutt remembers something we tried to forget." The room grew colder, because they all knew what he meant. Daniel hadn't just left the Reapers, he had walked away from something that could have destroyed them all. A night 15 years ago that none of them ever spoke about again. A warehouse. A fire. A body that was never meant to be found. They thought Daniel had taken that secret to the grave. But now, maybe he hadn't. Back at the station, Rosa looked out into the night through her office window. Pine Creek was a quiet town, but she had the unsettling feeling that it was about to get much louder. And darker. She didn't know what she was looking for yet, but she knew where to start. It was just past midnight when Rosa's phone buzzed on her desk, the sound sharp in the stillness of the station. She snatched it quickly, her heart skipping a beat. The caller ID read State Records Division. "We found something," the voice said on the other end. Daniel Briggs legally changed his name in 2011. Before that, he was Daniel Krieger. He was involved in an open investigation tied to a suspected arson case in Philadelphia, a warehouse fire that left one body unaccounted for. The file was buried. No conviction. The whole case was messy. Rosa froze. Her mind raced. A name change, a fire, a missing body. Why had Daniel never told her? Why was there nothing in his record? The silence on the line grew heavy until the voice added, "One more thing. He wasn't the only one listed in the file. There were 4 known associates under surveillance. One of them, Richard Slade, a.k.a. Sledge." Rosa's grip on the phone tightened. Now it made sense. The dog hadn't just stared at Sledge out of familiarity. He'd stared like someone who had been there. Who remembered that night? She closed the file and stood up, pacing the office. Ace had been Daniel's partner for nearly 8 years, which meant he had likely been around even before Daniel's full transfer to Pine Creek. That night in Philadelphia, could the dog have been there too? Could that fire, presumed accidental, have been something more? If Ace had witnessed it, even as a younger pup, perhaps the memory of scent, of fear, had never left him. And that would explain why he reacted to Sledge like he did. Meanwhile, back at the bar, the Reapers sat in grim silence. Sledge stood near the back, looking at a wall covered with old photos, black and white snapshots of rides, parties, brothers who had come and gone. His eyes settled on a picture near the top, one with Daniel, smiling, holding a beer, wearing the patch he'd later abandon. "I told him that night to walk away," Sledge muttered. "Told him we'd handle it. But he stayed. He helped. And then he disappeared." Reese stepped closer. "You think someone else knows?" Sledge didn't respond. He didn't need to. The unease in his eyes said it all. At the edge of town, Ace sat in the dark corner of Rosa's office, his body curled tightly but his eyes still wide open. He hadn't left Daniel's casket until the final minute. And now, even in sleep, his ears twitched at every creak in the building. Rosa watched him, wondering how much the dog truly remembered. Could he lead her somewhere? Could his instincts still point toward whatever truth Daniel had died protecting? The storm outside had begun to pick up again. Lightning cracked in the distance. Rosa grabbed her coat and keys. If she was going to find answers, she had to start at the beginning. And that meant Philadelphia. The fire. The place where Daniel stopped being Daniel Krieger and became Officer Briggs. As she turned off the lights and headed for the door, Ace lifted his head slowly and followed. The road to Philadelphia was long and drenched in fog. Rosa drove in silence, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers acting as a kind of metronome for her racing thoughts. Ace sat in the passenger seat, still and focused, like he knew exactly where they were going. Rosa glanced at him occasionally, still amazed at how alert he remained. "You were there, weren't you?" she whispered, more to herself than to the dog. "You saw something no one else did." As dawn broke over the city, she pulled into a rusted industrial zone. Forgotten warehouses, most half-collapsed or swallowed by weeds. She double-checked the address from the old fire report. Carlton Freight Warehouse, Dock 6. It hadn't been used in over a decade. The building still stood, charred and skeletal, like a ghost of its former self. Rosa stepped out cautiously, hand on her sidearm, though she didn't expect trouble yet. Ace jumped out beside her, ears perked, tail low. He sniffed the ground, then began to walk ahead without waiting. Inside, the warehouse smelled of old smoke and damp concrete. The air was thick, like the place had never fully exhaled since the night it burned. Rosa's boots crunched over broken glass and charred wood as she followed Ace through the shadows. He stopped suddenly near a wall at the back, nose pressed against the floor. Rosa knelt down and brushed aside a pile of debris. Beneath it, buried under years of ash and rot, was a scorched metal chain, still attached to a thick collar. Her heart sank. A second dog? Another K9? But this one hadn't made it out. Ace let out a low whine, soft, mournful. It wasn't grief. It was recognition, and something deeper. This was personal. Rosa's thoughts spiraled. What happened here wasn't just a fire. It was a cover-up, one that Daniel had walked away from, and tried to forget. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. Whatever had happened, someone went to great lengths to bury it. And someone else had made sure Daniel stayed quiet, maybe even in death. Suddenly, Ace turned sharply and barked once, then again, louder, more urgent. Rosa spun around just in time to see a shadow vanish out one of the warehouse's broken doors. She gave chase, gun drawn, lungs burning from the cold air. But when she reached the exit, the alley was empty. No footprints. No sound. Only the lingering echo of boots against pavement and the distant hum of an engine fading into the morning mist. Rosa stood there, breath visible in the air, heart pounding. Someone had been watching, maybe following her. And whoever it was didn't want this place disturbed. She looked back at the crumbling building, the burnt collar, and the dog who refused to forget. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about the truth he died trying to protect. And now, someone knew she was digging. Back at her motel just outside the city, Rosa sat hunched over the small table by the window, her laptop open, files and notes spread out like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet fit together. The photo she'd taken of the burned collar stared back at her from the screen. She'd run the serial number through an old equipment registry used by K9 units across the state. The result came in just before midnight. The collar belonged to a dog named Bruno, officially listed as missing during an operation in 2010. His handler? Daniel Krieger. Rosa leaned back, stunned. This was it. Proof that Daniel had been part of something serious long before he joined Pine Creek. But what kind of operation loses a K9 unit and buries the entire incident? The report had been quietly closed a year later with minimal detail. Bruno was never recovered. No disciplinary action was taken. No public statement. It was as if the whole unit agreed to forget. And if Daniel had been the one trying to break that silence, maybe someone made sure he couldn't. Ace paced the room restlessly, tail low, ears flicking toward every creak and whisper of wind outside. His anxiety was growing, and Rosa could feel it too. She pulled up old surveillance stills attached to the arson case from 2010. Most were blurry, nearly useless, but one made her freeze. In the background of a grainy frame taken the night of the fire stood 4 men. One of them wore a cut with the Iron Reaper's patch. His face was partially turned away, but even through the distortion, she recognized the jawline. The scar. Sledge. Rosa's blood turned cold. He hadn't just known about the fire. He had been there. And that made him far more than a suspicious presence at a funeral. It made him a potential accomplice. Maybe more. Maybe the one Daniel had feared most. She wondered, had Daniel tried to reconnect with him before he died? Warn him? Or confront him? She picked up her phone, debating whether to call for backup or confront Sledge herself. She knew the risks. But she also knew that if she brought too much attention, whoever was watching would vanish again, just like in the warehouse. Before she could make a move, there was a knock at the door. 3 taps. Then silence. Rosa froze. It was too late for housekeeping. Too rhythmic for a neighbor. She reached for her weapon slowly, motioning for Ace to stay low. The dog didn't bark, but his body stiffened, eyes locked on the door. Another knock. This time softer. Followed by a voice, muffled but clear. "Captain Delaney? You need to stop asking questions." She crept to the peephole. But no one was there. Rosa stood frozen by the door, heart pounding, her finger tense on the trigger guard. Ace remained perfectly still beside her, eyes fixed on the doorframe. She waited for another sound. Footsteps, a breath, anything, but all she heard was the buzz of a flickering neon sign outside. She counted silently in her head, then yanked the door open, weapon raised. Nothing. Just the dark parking lot and the distant sound of tires splashing through wet asphalt. Whoever had been there was gone, but not without leaving a message. She stepped outside, sweeping the area with her flashlight. Near the base of the door was a folded napkin. Simple. Ordinary. Except for the single sentence scrawled across it in black marker, "Let the dead stay buried." Her fingers curled around the note, pulse racing. That wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Someone knew what she was looking for. And they were close. Too close. Back inside, she bolted the door and closed all the curtains. Then, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the note. Ace pressed his head against her knee, grounding her with his presence. "We're in it now," she muttered, voice low. "And I don't think they're going to let us walk away." The strange thing was, Rosa didn't feel fear in the way most people would. She felt determination. Whoever tried to scare her didn't know her well enough. She wasn't the kind to back down. Her mind raced through next steps. She needed more than burned records and blurry photos. She needed a name. A witness. Someone who was there, but never part of the aftermath. Her memory snapped to a detail in Daniel's early transfer file, an emergency contact listed only once, then scrubbed in later versions, Evan Rourke. Not much on record, just an address in New Jersey and a note, "Former Reaper, dropped patch 2009. That made him a possible outlier. Maybe the only one left who wasn't loyal to the silence. Without hesitating, she packed her bag and pulled up directions to Rourke's last known address. It was a 2-hour drive. Remote farmland. Off-grid. The kind of place someone chose when they wanted to be forgotten. She didn't know if he'd talk, but if Daniel trusted him enough to list him once, that was something. And right now, she needed someone, anyone, to give her more than shadows and silence. As she started the car and pulled away from the motel, she didn't notice the black SUV parked down the street with its lights off. Inside, a man in a leather vest lit a cigarette, watching her taillights fade into the night. He took a long drag, then spoke into a burner phone without taking his eyes off the road. "She's headed to Rourke." Evan Rourke's house sat on a lonely patch of land surrounded by overgrown cornfields and rusted fence posts. The paint on the siding was peeling, the front porch sagging like the home itself was tired of standing. Rosa parked at the edge of the gravel drive, one hand resting on her holstered weapon. Ace sat up in the passenger seat, ears forward, already alert. There was no sign of movement, no lights. But she could feel it. Someone was inside. She knocked once. Then again, louder. Nothing. She was about to knock a third time when the door creaked open just an inch, and the barrel of a shotgun appeared through the gap. A gravelly voice followed. "I don't do visitors." Rosa didn't flinch. "I'm here about Daniel Krieger. Or maybe you knew him as Briggs." Silence. Then the shotgun slowly retreated, and the door opened just wide enough for her to see the man behind it. Older, weathered, his hair silver and long, eyes wary but clear. "You've got 5 minutes." Inside, the house smelled of dust and old oil. Tools lay scattered on a table, and faded newspaper clippings were tacked to the wall, many of them burned at the edges. Rourke sat down without offering a seat. Rosa remained standing. Daniel listed you as a contact once. Then your name vanished. Why? Rourke took a breath, then spoke slowly. Because I told him to erase it. After Philly, it was safer for both of us. He looked at Ace, who now sat calmly near the door. Didn't think I'd ever see that dog again. Rosa leaned forward. What happened that night? The warehouse. The fire. The missing body. Rourke didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to a photo on the wall. 5 men in biker cuts, smiling. Daniel was one of them. Younger. Lighter. We were supposed to scare a guy. Rough him up, teach him a lesson. But he fought back. There was a struggle. Someone, maybe Sledge, hit him too hard. The guy didn't get back up. We panicked. Set the fire to make it look like an accident. But Daniel, he didn't agree. He wanted to go to the cops. But he didn't, Rosa said. Rourke shook his head. He stayed just long enough to get Bruno out. The dog didn't make it, and that broke something in him. That's when he left. Changed his name. Joined the force. He looked Rosa in the eyes. But he never stopped watching his back. He knew one day someone might come to tie up loose ends. Rosa felt a chill. You think that's what happened to him? Rourke didn't blink. I don't think. I know. Outside, Ace suddenly let out a sharp bark. Then another. Rosa spun toward the window and saw it, headlights in the distance, approaching fast down the gravel road. Rourke stood, shotgun in hand. Looks like your 5 minutes are up. The roar of tires grinding against gravel snapped Rosa into motion. She dashed to the window and caught a glimpse of a matte black SUV cutting its headlights as it turned off the main road and into Rourke's drive. 2 figures stepped out, moving fast and with purpose. No hesitation. No curiosity. Rosa recognized the body language instantly. Professionals. Whoever they were, they hadn't come to talk. They'd come to finish something. Rourke moved like muscle memory was all he had left. In a single motion, he locked the door, slid a second bolt into place, and tossed Rosa a revolver from a drawer near the sink. "Back up?" he asked. "No," Rosa replied. "I didn't tell anyone I was coming here." Rourke cursed under his breath and peeked out through the blinds. "Then they knew you were coming before you did." Ace stood between them now, tense, a low growl rising from his chest. A sudden thud hit the front of the house. Then another. Rosa and Rourke ducked low. "They're not kicking down the door yet," she whispered. "They're testing it. Seeing if we'll panic." Rourke loaded a shell into his shotgun and muttered, "Let's disappoint them." The house had no back exit. Just one long hallway that led to a utility room, boarded up years ago. Their options were vanishing by the second. One of the windows shattered. Rosa raised the revolver, heart racing. A smoke canister was tossed in, hissing violently. "They're trying to flush us out," she shouted, coughing as the acrid gas filled the room. Rourke grabbed an old towel, doused it in water, and pressed it to his face. Rosa followed his lead, pulling Ace by the collar as they retreated deeper into the house. Every second they stayed inside, the air grew thicker, vision blurrier. They needed a way out, fast. That's when Ace darted ahead and began scratching wildly at a corner of the wall behind the tool rack. Rosa ran to him and noticed the faint outline of a seam. "This wall's not real," she said, feeling along the edges. Rourke nodded. "Built it myself after I quit the club. Just in case someone came looking." He yanked the rack aside and revealed a hidden door that opened into a dark, narrow passage under the floorboards. Without another word, they climbed in, pulling the hatch closed behind them just as a boot crashed through the front door. In the crawlspace, damp and suffocating, they listened. Heavy footsteps moved through the house. The creak of floorboards. Furniture overturned. Glass breaking. And then, silence. Rosa held her breath. Ace didn't move. Rourke mouthed two words that chilled her. "They're still here." The crawlspace was narrow and stale, the air thick with years of untouched dust. Rosa could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears as she pressed herself against the dirt wall, revolver tight in her grip. Above them, the footsteps grew slower, more methodical. They weren't searching anymore. They were listening. Ace remained still as stone, barely breathing, but his ears twitched at every creak, every whisper of motion. Rourke held his shotgun at the ready, but even he looked less confident than before. Then came a new sound. A faint beep. Mechanical. Repeating. Rosa's eyes widened. They'd planted something. Rourke's face drained of color. "Motion sensors," he whispered. "They're mapping the structure from inside." The beeping stopped. One of the men upstairs tapped on the floor twice. Then silence. Rosa tightened her jaw. This wasn't a raid. This was surgical. They weren't there to scare anyone. They were there to remove every trace of truth that Daniel might have left behind. Suddenly, the ceiling above them groaned. A panel was being pried up, directly over their heads. Rosa pulled Ace close, and Rourke raised the shotgun. They had no more time. "We have to move now," she hissed. They began crawling fast through the narrow passage, deeper into the foundation of the house. Dirt crumbled around them. In the distance, Rosa saw a sliver of light coming from what looked like a basement entrance, half-rotted but open. Just as they reached it, a burst of noise erupted behind them, wood splintering, boots crashing down. Rourke turned and fired a blast through the floor above, buying Rosa and Ace precious seconds. She kicked open the basement door, pulling Rourke through behind her. The three of them stumbled into a crumbling underground storage room, lit faintly by an old emergency lantern. "There's a hatch behind that freezer," Rourke said between breaths. "Leads to the woods." Rosa didn't ask questions. She threw her shoulder into the freezer and pushed it aside. The hatch groaned as it opened, revealing a ladder into darkness. They climbed down and emerged into the cold night, half a mile behind the house. Smoke was already rising into the sky. Rosa turned back and saw flames flickering through the broken windows. They weren't just trying to kill them. They were erasing the house. The history. The evidence. Everything. Whoever was behind this wasn't just cleaning up after Daniel. They were burning down the path behind him. As they stumbled into the tree line, Rourke suddenly stopped. His face pale. His hand pressed to his side. Blood soaked through his shirt. He had been hit. Rosa grabbed him before he collapsed, struggling to keep him on his feet. "We need to get you to a hospital," she said. Rourke shook his head. "No hospitals. No police. You can't trust anyone." Rosa looked at him, fear and frustration flooding her voice. "Then what do I do?" He looked up at her, eyes heavy. "You finish what Daniel started. What would you do if you were in Rosa's shoes? Trust someone, or go it alone to finish what Daniel started? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And tell us, who do you think is really behind this silent operation? Your theory might just shape the next chapter. The morning sun barely cut through the fog as Rosa guided Rourke's truck along a winding back road, Ace curled in the seat beside her, ears constantly alert. Rourke lay in the back, wrapped in an old canvas blanket, pale but alive, barely. He drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling pieces of names, half-sentences that made little sense. But one word kept surfacing again and again: ledger. Whatever that meant, Rosa knew it wasn't financial. Not in the way most people think. This ledger held history. And someone was willing to kill for it. She pulled into an abandoned ranger station deep in the state forest, a safe house used during old operations. The place had no power, no signal, but it had 4 walls and a lockable door. After tending to Rourke's wound as best as she could, she sat with her notepad and began connecting dots. Sledge. The Reapers. The warehouse. Bruno. And now, the fire at Rourke's house. Too much loss. Too much coincidence. And Daniel, who had once walked away from that world, had tried to bring something back into the light. That ledger, perhaps, was the key. Rosa searched through Rourke's backpack, looking for medication or supplies. Instead, she found a small wooden box, cracked on one side and wrapped in layers of duct tape. No lock. Just old-fashioned desperation to keep it sealed. Inside were faded photographs, dog tags, and finally, a battered leather notebook, scorched at the edges. On the front, in Daniel's handwriting, were the words, "For Rosa if I don't make it." Her hands trembled as she opened the first page. The notebook wasn't just a ledger. It was a confession. Names, dates, details about shipments, backroom deals, and the network of protection that stretched from Philadelphia to Pine Creek. Corrupt officers, former club members turned enforcers, even local politicians. Daniel had documented it all. But he hadn't released it. Maybe he had been planning to, when he died. Rosa read faster, heart hammering. At the bottom of one page was a name she never expected to see. Captain Roy Mercer, her former supervisor at the Pine Creek Division, retired 2 years ago. A man she once called a mentor. The betrayal felt like a punch to the chest. Mercer had trained her, backed her promotion, held her parents' hands when they died. And all along, he might have been the one pulling the strings behind Daniel's silence. Rosa looked over at Ace, who now watched her closely, sensing her change in energy. She held the notebook tight, teeth clenched. "This goes deeper than I thought," she whispered. "We're not just chasing ghosts. We're chasing men who still hold the matches." Outside, a branch snapped in the woods. Rosa stood, quietly turning off the lamp. She reached for her gun and stepped to the window, heart pounding. There was no figure in sight, but the unease was growing. She had the truth in her hands now, and that meant someone else would be coming to take it. The forest was quiet again, but Rosa didn't lower her weapon. Not yet. The snap of that branch had sent a message, whether it was intentional or not. You're being watched. Back inside the cabin, she placed Daniel's notebook in her duffel bag and zipped it tightly. Rourke was asleep, feverish, muttering names from a past he couldn't seem to outrun. Ace stayed by his side, as if guarding more than just a wounded man, guarding the final link Rosa had to Daniel's unfinished war. She sat by the small table and stared at her phone. No signal. No backup. She had a choice to make. She could leave the woods now and drive straight to the nearest news station, hand over the ledger, and pray someone would believe her before someone else tried to shut her up for good. Or she could stay in the shadows a little longer, dig deeper, follow the last name in that notebook, Captain Roy Mercer. The man who taught her everything about law enforcement. The man who might have orchestrated every lie. Her fingers hovered over Daniel's final note. Don't trust the uniform. Trust the dog. A bitter smile flickered on her lips. Ace, lying at Rourke's feet, lifted his head slightly, as if acknowledging the line. Rosa felt torn between fury and heartbreak. Every page she turned in that ledger stripped away another piece of the foundation she'd built her career on. What if Mercer wasn't the only one? What if others she respected were part of it too? Would anyone believe her if she spoke up? She stood and walked outside into the cold air. The woods stretched endlessly in all directions, offering both cover and isolation. Pulling out a burner phone from her jacket, one she'd kept for deep cases, she turned it on and typed out a single message. I need to meet. Off the record. It's about Daniel. She sent it to only one person, Agent Mia Carter, a contact at Internal Affairs who once hinted she believed there were cracks in the Pine Creek department. If anyone could help her without alerting the wrong people, it was Carter. Back inside, Rourke stirred, coughing violently. Rosa rushed to his side with a bottle of water. He grabbed her wrist, weak but urgent. "Mercer, he was supposed to protect us. We trusted him." Rosa nodded, her voice quiet. "I know. I did too." His grip tightened. "He's still got people watching. Everywhere. If you go after him, make sure you're ready to be hunted." She looked him in the eyes. "I already am." And as Rosa sat back down, notebook in hand, she made her decision. She wouldn't just expose the truth. She would finish what Daniel started, and bring down every last name in that ledger, even if it meant becoming a fugitive herself. Rosa parked the truck 2 blocks away from the modest suburban house in Trenton, New Jersey. The sun dipped low behind the row of identical homes, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. The address belonged to Lieutenant Carl Whitaker, one of the names listed in Daniel's notebook. Officially retired. Unofficially, Daniel had tied him to a much darker role, a liaison between the Iron Reapers and the law enforcement shield that protected them. Rosa suspected he'd be the first weak link. She watched the house for several minutes. Freshly painted fence, porch light already on, a new luxury sedan gleaming in the driveway. The life of a man with something to hide. She stepped out with Ace at her side. No badge, no backup, no Kevlar. Tonight, Rosa wasn't acting as an officer. She was acting as a woman who had lost too much, and was done asking politely. Whitaker opened the door with a forced smile that froze when he saw her face, and the dog. "Captain Delaney," he said carefully. "Heard about Briggs. Tragic. Real shame." Rosa didn't answer. She handed him her phone, which displayed a scanned page from Daniel's ledger. His name, dates, coded transactions. His connection to Reapers and private security contracts exposed. Whitaker read it, his color draining as fast as the lie on his lips. "You shouldn't have that," he whispered. "That should have gone up in flames with him." "But it didn't," Rosa replied coldly. "And now you're going to talk. Because if you don't, this goes straight to the DOJ tomorrow morning." Whitaker faltered, eyes darting toward the hallway. He was calculating, but Rosa could see the panic creeping in. "It was Mercer," he admitted finally. "He made the deal after the warehouse fire. Silence in exchange for protection. Access. When Briggs tried to break from it, Mercer gave the order." Rosa felt the world shift under her feet. The betrayal confirmed. Whitaker kept talking, his voice low and broken. "Mercer has people everywhere. Internal Affairs, the state. He knew you were digging. He sent those men to Rourke's. That fire? That was a warning. He won't let you get further." Rosa stepped closer, her voice a whisper now. "Where is he?" Whitaker hesitated, then gave the answer that made Rosa's blood run cold. "He never left Pine Creek." Before she could respond, a shot shattered the living room window. Whitaker collapsed with a scream, blood blooming from his shoulder. Rosa dropped behind the couch, pulling Ace with her. Through the broken glass, she saw a black sedan speeding off down the street. No faces. No plates. Just a clear message. "We're watching. And now we know where you are." The roads leading back to Pine Creek felt different now. The town that once represented duty and home had shifted into something colder, darker, a place built on lies. Rosa kept her eyes on the highway, her grip firm on the steering wheel. Ace sat beside her, silent but alert, watching the trees blur past. In the back seat, the battered notebook sat tucked inside a messenger bag. Inside it, names, transactions, memories that bled like old wounds. She was going back to confront the man who taught her everything, Captain Roy Mercer. She couldn't go to the precinct. If Mercer still had people on the inside, walking in would be suicide. Instead, she drove past the station and turned onto a side road that led to an old decommissioned training site on the edge of the woods. It was where she and Daniel had trained with their K9s. A place of memory, of trust. But tonight, it would become something else, a meeting point. She had sent one final encrypted message to Agent Mia Carter from Internal Affairs, asking her to come alone. Rosa had one chance to hand over the truth. While she waited, she rehearsed the confrontation in her head. Mercer had been like a father figure. He'd pinned her badge, spoken at her parents' funeral. He had given her purpose when she felt hollow. And all along, he had been protecting murderers and laundering the blood of the reapers through law enforcement channels. Rosa tried not to let her hands shake as she thought of it. He lied to all of us. But he won't walk away this time. A car pulled up slowly. Black sedan. Unmarked. Rosa gripped her weapon, but relaxed slightly as Agent Carter stepped out. Professional, poised, dressed in civilian clothes. She held up both hands as she approached. "No tail," she said quietly. "I came alone, just like you asked." Rosa handed her the notebook without a word. Carter flipped through it, her face growing increasingly pale. "My God. If this is real," Rosa cut in. "It is. And the man who started all of it is still here, still pulling strings. I need your help to take him down. Clean. Legal. No leaks." Carter nodded slowly, her voice hard. "Then we move carefully. I'll initiate a shadow investigation. No paperwork, no digital trail. But if we're going to get Mercer, we need him off guard." Rosa looked toward town, the glow of streetlights barely visible through the trees. "He's already on guard. He shot Whitaker. Burned down Rourke's. If we wait too long, I'm next." Carter considered that. "Then let's make him think he's already won. Let him come to you." The plan was dangerous, but Rosa knew it was the only way. They would bait the trap, and Mercer would come to finish what he started. But this time, Rosa would be ready. The plan was simple on paper. Rosa would return to Pine Creek and make herself visible. Go to familiar places, be seen by familiar people, and act like she was giving up. The idea was to make Mercer believe she was vulnerable, that the weight of the truth had crushed her resolve. All the while, Carter would be building a quiet, off-the-record case in the background, collecting legal ammunition for a final takedown. It was risky. It was bold. It was exactly what Daniel would have done. Rosa returned to her old apartment just after midnight. Nothing had changed. Same creaky floors. Same dusty badge display on the wall. She sat at the kitchen table in silence, Ace curled at her feet, the revolver on the table beside her. If they were watching, and she was sure they were, then she needed to play her role. She turned on the living room light, left the curtains slightly open, and made a phone call loud enough for anyone listening. "I'm done," she said to no one on the other end. "I just want it to stop." It didn't take long. The next morning, someone left an envelope wedged in her door. No stamp. No name. Inside, a single note. "Meet me where the badge died." She didn't need a map. She knew exactly what it meant. The old highway bridge where Daniel had been found shot, staged to look like a drug bust gone wrong. The badge planted next to his body had been cracked down the middle. Rosa had visited the spot a dozen times since. It had haunted her. Now, it would become the stage for the final act. She relayed the message to Carter through their burner phone, and together, they planned the sting. Carter would be nearby with a discreet mobile team. No uniforms, no marked cars. The goal wasn't just to catch Mercer. It was to catch everyone who showed up to protect him. Rosa knew this might be her only shot. But deep inside, a quiet dread whispered, what if he doesn't come alone? What if Mercer had planned his own version of a trap? That evening, Rosa stood under the bridge as the wind howled across the water. The sky was dark, moonless. Ace stayed close, body tense. Every sound echoed too loudly. Every shadow felt too long. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Carter. "In position. We wait for your signal." Rosa swallowed hard and looked up at the road above. No headlights yet. Just silence. Then, a single pair of boots stepped into view at the edge of the bridge. Rosa didn't move. The boots belonged to a man who had once stood beside her on graduation day. The man who once told her justice was sacred. Now, Captain Roy Mercer stepped into the pale glow of the bridge's overhead light, wearing civilian clothes and a calm expression that felt like a mask stretched over something far more dangerous. In his right hand, not a weapon, but a cigarette. "Didn't expect you to come alone," he said softly. "I'm not alone," Rosa replied. Her voice was steady, but her heart pounded like a war drum. Ace stood beside her, eyes locked on Mercer, growling low. Rosa's fingers brushed the edge of her holster, just in case. "You killed him," she continued. "You sent those men after Rourke. After me. After everyone who tried to speak." Mercer sighed, exhaling smoke into the cold air. "I didn't kill Daniel. I just let nature take its course. He couldn't stay out of the past. Neither can you, it seems." She took a step forward. "You trained me to believe in the badge, to believe in truth. And the whole time, you were feeding a criminal network from inside the house." Mercer chuckled. "You think I'm the villain? I kept Pine Creek running. I kept people alive. You think you know the whole story because of a notebook written by a guilty man." Rosa's jaw tightened. "I know enough." She paused. "And so does Internal Affairs." For the first time, Mercer's expression faltered. Just a flicker. His eyes shifted toward the tree line, calculating. He took one slow step forward. "You really think Carter's gonna save you? The minute she takes that ledger public, half the force goes down with me. You'll burn every bridge you ever walked across." Rosa kept her gun low but ready. "Then let it all burn. I'd rather live with ashes than rot under your shadow." Suddenly, the bushes behind her rustled. Rosa turned sharply, and that was the opening Mercer needed. He reached into his coat and drew a weapon, fast and practiced. A single shot rang out. Ace lunged. Chaos exploded under the bridge. Rosa hit the ground hard as Carter's team emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Another shot fired. Then a third. Then silence. When Rosa sat up, ears ringing, she saw Ace limping back to her side, blood on his shoulder. Mercer lay on the concrete, a bullet through his chest. Carter stood over him, her face grim. Rosa pulled Ace close, shaking, but still breathing. It was over. Mercer was dead. But as Carter approached and knelt beside her, she whispered, "This wasn't the end. This was just the head of the snake." The next morning, Rosa sat in the sterile hallway of a state medical center, Ace sedated and resting after surgery to remove the bullet fragment from his shoulder. The vet had said he'd make a full recovery, but Rosa couldn't shake the image of him throwing himself into the line of fire. That dog had saved her life, again. She held his paw as he slept, whispering the same words Daniel once said after their first mission together, "Still with me, partner?" Ace's ears twitched faintly in response. Carter stepped into the room, her expression unreadable. "We swept Mercer's phone and house," she said quietly. "He was paranoid. Deleted everything. But there was one name that kept surfacing. Repeated messages. Bank transfers. Late-night calls." Rosa looked up, drained but alert. "Who?" Carter handed her a photo. A man in a suit, clean-cut, mid-50s. Confident smile. Rosa didn't recognize him. "Senator James Halbridge," Carter said, "chairman of the Law Enforcement Oversight Committee." Rosa stared at the image. "You're saying Mercer was working with a U.S. senator?" Carter nodded. Mercer wasn't the top of the food chain. He was the gatekeeper. Halbridge funds and shields the infrastructure behind these alliances between outlaw groups and dirty cops. It's national. Daniel's ledger barely scratched the surface. Rosa leaned back in disbelief. She had thought they were playing a local game. Pine Creek. One town. One circle. But it was federal. Political. And now, her name was on their radar. "We have to go public," Rosa said. "Now." "Everything." Carter hesitated. "If we leak this without evidence that directly ties Halbridge, we lose everything. He's too powerful. Protected. We need a confession. A wire. Something airtight. Otherwise, we become targets. Or footnotes." Rosa's fists clenched. The more she fought for the truth, the deeper the pit seemed to go. Mercer had only been the messenger. The real architects were still comfortably in office, untouched by blood. Carter pulled a USB drive from her jacket. "We found a voice memo Mercer recorded a week before he died. It's fragmented, but he mentions Halbridge. Code names. Transfers. It's a start." Rosa took the drive, her hands shaking slightly. "We're not going to survive this by playing by the book," she said. Carter met her gaze. "No. We survive it by making them think we're done fighting." Rosa stood and looked down at Ace. He was still sleeping, breathing softly. She knew what was coming. If they wanted to expose Halbridge, they'd have to go underground again. No badge. No backup. Just instinct. Just truth. And she had already made her choice. 3 days later, under a different name and wearing a different face, Rosa walked through the marbled lobby of a private security firm in Washington, D.C. Her hair was darker now, pulled back tightly beneath a hat, and her badge was replaced by a forged ID under the name Marissa Quinn. The firm was a known contractor for federal agencies, and, according to Mercer's recordings, one of the laundering channels used by Senator Halbridge's network. It was the closest she had ever been to the eye of the storm. She kept her movements calm, deliberate. No hesitation. People in places like this responded to confidence more than credentials. At the front desk, she handed over her ID and said, "I'm here to discuss Project Sentinel. A follow-up on Daniel Briggs' report." The receptionist blinked, confused, but the moment she heard Daniel's name, her expression changed. She made a call. Minutes later, Rosa was being escorted to a private elevator. No questions asked. The notebook had been right. Daniel's name still opened doors. The elevator stopped on the top floor. A conference room overlooked the city, glass walls spotless and sterile. Inside stood 3 men in suits, none of them smiling. One of them, tall, polished, and surrounded by an aura of power, stepped forward. "You must be the new handler from OIG," he said. Rosa nodded. He extended his hand. "Senator Halbridge." Her heart didn't skip, it stopped. He was standing in front of her, completely unaware of who she really was. She didn't shake his hand. Instead, she set a small folder on the table. Inside it, selected pages from Daniel's ledger and a flash drive with Mercer's voice memo. "This is what's been circulating," she said. "If it leaks, your name's attached to 3 shell companies, 2 security contracts, and 1 illegal transfer from a private account in Panama." Halbridge barely flinched. He leaned back in his chair and studied her. "And what exactly do you want, Miss Quinn?" Rosa felt her pulse in her throat. "I want to know how far you're willing to go to keep this buried," she said calmly. "Because if you're not careful, the next Briggs won't come asking. He'll come exposing." Halbridge chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You think this is about secrets? This is about control. You expose me, I fall. Another one takes my place. The system survives because we built it to replace the weak links. She stood, staring him down. Then maybe it's time someone started tearing the system apart, link by link. Halbridge leaned forward, his smile fading. Be careful, Miss Quinn. You're not as invisible as you think. As she turned to leave, Rosa's fingers brushed against the tiny recording device hidden in her jacket. The entire conversation was now saved. And for the first time in a long while, she had leverage. Rosa left the building without looking back, her pace steady, her breath held tight in her chest. The tiny recording device pressed against her ribs beneath her jacket now carried the most damning evidence of the entire operation. Senator Halbridge's voice, calm and calculated, admitting to a criminal empire built inside the very structure designed to prevent it. She didn't feel victorious. She felt hunted. The kind of hunted that doesn't leave footprints but moves through wires, satellites, and digital whispers. She reached her car 3 blocks away and climbed in, locking the doors immediately. Ace was in the back seat, resting, but his head lifted as soon as she entered. He sensed it too. Something was wrong. Rosa started the engine, checked the rear-view mirror. No tails. No obvious signs of surveillance. But the city itself felt off. She had been a cop long enough to know when something unseen was closing in. Her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice came through. Come. Smug. Senator Halbridge. I admire your courage, Captain Delaney. Really. Daniel would be proud. But you're playing checkers on a chessboard. You think a recording will take me down? I just had your burner flagged through a federal algorithm. You're not leaving DC unnoticed. Rosa's jaw clenched. Then you should know I already sent a copy of the recording to a federal contact. Halbridge chuckled. No, you tried. But Carter's name just got flagged on a DOJ internal review list for unauthorized use of surveillance tech. She's being detained as we speak. Rosa's blood turned cold. You're bluffing. You'll find out in about 10 minutes when every bridge you thought you had burns. Then came the click. The line went dead. Rosa sat frozen for a second. Then another. She tossed the phone out the window and slammed her foot on the gas. She had one chance left. An old news reporter Daniel once trusted, a man named Ellis Moore who ran a dying local paper in Pine Creek. If she could get to him and leak the recording, Halbridge wouldn't be able to control the fallout fast enough. As she sped down the highway out of D.C., police chatter began to echo in her ears through the car's emergency alert system. Be on the lookout for a dark blue SUV, license plate 4V8. Her vehicle. Her cover was blown. She was no longer a quiet threat. She was a fugitive. She looked at Ace through the rearview mirror. Looks like we run, partner. Ace didn't blink. He just sat straighter. Ready. And ahead of them, the open road waited, for either redemption or ruin. Rosa drove for hours without stopping, cutting through backroads and service routes, avoiding cameras and patrol zones. Every highway sign pointing toward Pine Creek felt like a reminder. You can still turn back. But she didn't. She wasn't just carrying a recording. She was carrying everything Daniel died trying to expose. And if she failed, it would all vanish again, buried beneath political handshakes and smiling lies. She reached the outskirts of town by sunrise, pulling into a dusty lot behind the old Pine Creek Gazette. The building looked half abandoned, windows dirty, roof sagging. But inside, behind an ancient desk and piles of unread newspapers, sat Ellis Moore, white hair, trembling hands, and eyes that still burned with the fire of a real journalist. He didn't ask questions when he saw Rosa. He simply nodded, as if he'd been waiting for this moment since Daniel disappeared. She handed him the flash drive, her voice low but firm. This can't go to just one outlet. If you publish alone, they'll silence you before it spreads. Ellis looked up, his voice a whisper. Don't worry. I've already prepared a dead man's switch. 37 independent journalists across the country get the story the moment I press enter. Rosa let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Then press it. And he did. Within minutes, the wheels began to turn. Headlines appeared. Audio clips surfaced. Names were named. Daniel Briggs. Captain Mercer. Senator Halbridge. The ledger pages. The voice recordings. The public response was immediate. Fury, disbelief, shock. Rosa watched it all unfold from Ellis's office, Ace lying quietly at her feet. She wasn't smiling. Not yet. She knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a much bigger war. As police scanners erupted with confusion and federal agencies scrambled to contain the fallout, Rosa stood up and looked out the window. She knew what would come next. Halbridge wouldn't go quietly. His machine would fight back. There would be threats, smear campaigns, maybe even bullets. But the truth was out now. And truth has a way of surviving, even when people don't. Later that night, Rosa recorded a single message and scheduled it to publish at dawn. Her voice was calm, resolute. My name is Rosa Delaney. I am a former police captain, and I stand by every word that's been released. If you're hearing this, it means I've done what Daniel Briggs died trying to do. I don't know what happens next. But if you're watching, don't let them bury it again. She paused, looked down at Ace. Some badges may break, but the oath behind them never should. If this story moved you, don't let it disappear into the noise. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes in justice. Because some stories aren't just stories, they're warnings. And the more people hear them, the harder they are to bury.